In the vast expanse of South Asia, where the mighty Indus River flows from the Himalayan heights, down through Pakistan and into the Arabian Sea, there once flourished a civilization so advanced, so sophisticated, that even today, nearly 5,000 years after its emergence, archaeologists and historians still struggle to comprehend the full scope of its achievements. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, a Bronze Age society that rose to prominence around 3300 BCE and maintained its cultural dominance for nearly 2 millennia, before mysteriously declining around 1300 BCE. When we speak of ancient civilizations, our minds often turn immediately to the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Yet here in the Indus Valley, stretching across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, there existed a contemporary civilization that in many ways surpassed its more famous counterparts. The Indus Valley Civilization covered an area of approximately 1.2 million square kilometers, making it larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its peak, this remarkable society may have supported a population of over 5 million people, distributed across more than 1,000 settlements, ranging from small farming villages to vast urban centres that would have amazed any visitor from the ancient world. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization begins not with kings or conquerors, but with farmers and traders, craftsmen and builders who gradually transformed the fertile floodplains of the Indus River system into one of humanity's first great urban experiments. Unlike the hierarchical societies of Egypt with their god-kings or the city-states of Mesopotamia with their warrior rulers, the Indus Valley Civilization appears to have developed along different lines entirely, creating what some scholars have described as the world's first democracy, or at least a society with remarkably egalitarian principles. The discovery of this lost civilization is itself a story worth telling in detail. For centuries the great cities of the Indus lay buried beneath layers of earth and time, their existence completely unknown to the modern world. Local populations had long known of the strange mounds that dotted the landscape, some using the ancient bricks they found for their own construction projects, never realizing they were dismantling the remains of one of humanity's earliest urban centres. The British colonial administration in India occasionally received reports of unusual artefacts being discovered, seals with strange symbols and perfectly crafted stone weights. But these isolated finds generated little interest among scholars who were primarily focused on the already well-documented civilizations of the Mediterranean and Near East. Everything changed in the 1920s when systematic excavations began at two sites that would become synonymous with the Indus Valley Civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. The Archaeological Survey of India, under the direction of John Marshall, initiated excavations that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient history. What emerged from the earth challenged every assumption about Bronze Age societies. Here were cities laid out on a grid pattern that would seem familiar to any modern urban planner, with wide main streets running north to south and east to west, creating perfectly organized city blocks. The buildings were constructed from uniformly sized bricks, manufactured to precise specifications that remained consistent across the entire civilization. Most remarkably, these cities featured sophisticated drainage systems with covered sewers running beneath the streets, a level of urban sanitation that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the 19th century. As excavations continued through the 20th century and into the 21st, the true scope of the Indus Valley Civilization gradually came into focus. This wasn't merely a collection of impressive cities, but an entire cultural system that had spread across a vast geographical area. From Chortagai in Afghanistan to Daimabad in Maharashtra, from Sutka Gandur on the Arabian Sea coast to the foothills of the Himalayas, the distinctive markers of Harappan culture appeared again and again. The same standardized weights and measures, the same architectural principles, the same mysterious script that continues to defy decipherment, and the same remarkable emphasis on cleanliness and order that seems to have been a defining characteristic of this ancient society. The geography of the Indus Valley region played a crucial role in shaping this civilization. The Indus River, one of the longest rivers in Asia, originates in the Tibetan Plateau and flows through a diverse landscape of mountains, plains, and eventually delta regions before emptying into the Arabian Sea. Along with its major tributaries, particularly the now dry Gagha-Hakra River, which some scholars identify with the legendary Sarasvati River mentioned in ancient Indian texts, the Indus River system created a vast alluvial plain of extraordinary fertility. The annual flooding of these rivers, while less predictable than the Nile floods that sustained ancient Egypt, deposited rich sediments that made agriculture possible on a large scale. The climate during the height of the Indus Valley civilization was somewhat different from today's conditions. Evidence suggests that the region received more rainfall during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE, supporting not just agriculture, but also extensive forests that provided timber for construction and fuel. The diverse ecosystem included everything from the marine resources of the Arabian seacoast to the mineral wealth of the surrounding hills and mountains. This environmental richness provided the material foundation upon which the Indus Valley civilization would build its remarkable urban culture. Understanding the Indus Valley civilization requires us to abandon many of our preconceptions about ancient societies. Where we expect to find palaces, we find none. Where we anticipate discovering royal tombs filled with golden treasures, we encounter only modest burials with simple grave goods. Where other civilizations left us epic poems celebrating the deeds of warrior kings, the Indus Valley civilization left us only enigmatic symbols on small seals, their meaning still locked away from our comprehension. Yet what they did leave behind speaks to achievements that in many ways surpass those of their contemporaries. Cities with functioning sewage systems, standardized weights, and measures that suggest a complex economy, evidence of long-distance trade reaching from Central Asia to Mesopotamia, and an artistic tradition that created some of the most beautiful and enigmatic objects of the ancient world. The people of the Indus Valley civilization were innovators and engineers, traders and craftsmen, farmers and sailors. They domesticated cotton, and were quite possibly the first people in the world to weave it into cloth. They developed new techniques for working with bronze, creating tools and ornaments of exceptional quality. They built dockyards and warehouses, granaries and public baths, drainage systems and wells. They traded with distant lands, sending their distinctive carnelian beads and other goods as far as Mesopotamia and perhaps beyond. They created a system of standardized weights and measures that would have facilitated trade across their vast territory, and they did all this while maintaining what appears to have been a remarkably peaceful society, with little evidence of warfare or conflict on the scale seen in other Bronze Age civilizations. The urban planning of the Indus Valley cities reveals a society with a strong sense of civic organization and communal responsibility. The cities were typically divided into two main sections: a raised citadel area that contained public buildings and what appear to be administrative structures, and a lower town where the majority of the population lived and worked. The citadel wasn't a fortress for elite rulers, as we might expect, but rather seems to have housed facilities that served the entire community. The famous Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a carefully waterproofed pool surrounded by changing rooms and other facilities, was almost certainly used for ritual purification, suggesting the importance of cleanliness in both physical and spiritual terms. The residential areas of these cities tell us much about daily life in the Indus Valley civilization. Houses were built around central courtyards, providing private outdoor space for families. Most homes had their own wells, ensuring access to fresh water, and were connected to the city's drainage system through carefully constructed channels. The presence of bathrooms in many houses, complete with seated latrines connected to the sewage system, speaks to a level of domestic comfort that wouldn't become common in many parts of the world until modern times. The uniformity of house construction suggests some form of building codes or regulations, another indication of the sophisticated civic administration that must have existed. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Indus Valley civilization is what appears to be the absence of marked social stratification, at least as reflected in the archaeological record. While there are certainly variations in house sizes and presumably in wealth, we don't see the extreme disparities that characterize many ancient societies. There are no obvious palaces that dwarf all other structures, no royal quarters separated from the common people by walls and guards. Even in death, the people of the Indus Valley seem to have practiced a kind of equality, with burials showing relatively modest grave goods regardless of the size or location of the grave. This apparent egalitarianism extends to the realm of religion and ideology as well. Unlike Egypt with its monumental pyramids and temples, or Mesopotamia with its towering ziggurats, the Indus Valley civilization built no massive monuments to gods or kings. The largest structures were public facilities like the Great Bath or the supposed granaries, buildings that served practical or communal purposes rather than glorifying individual rulers or deities. Small figurines found at various sites suggest religious practices, including what may be an early form of goddess worship and possibly the veneration of a proto-Shiva figure. But these appear to have been personal or household religious objects rather than state-sponsored cults. The economic foundation of the Indus Valley civilization rested on agriculture, supplemented by crafts production and trade. The farmers of the Indus Valley cultivated a variety of crops, including wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, sesame, and dates. They were among the first people in the world to grow cotton on a large scale, developing techniques for cotton cultivation that would eventually spread throughout the ancient world. The agricultural surplus produced by these farmers supported not just the urban populations, but also specialized craftsmen who produced goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Animal husbandry played a significant role in the economy as well. Cattle, water buffalo, goats and sheep were raised for meat, milk and hides. The zebu cattle, with their distinctive humped backs, were particularly important and appear frequently in Indus Valley art. Chickens were domesticated here earlier than almost anywhere else in the world, eventually spreading from the Indus Valley to become one of the most important domestic animals globally. The Indus Valley people also kept cats and dogs as domestic animals, and evidence suggests they may have been among the first to domesticate elephants, though this remains a matter of scholarly debate. The craft production of the Indus Valley civilization achieved levels of sophistication that amazed early excavators and continue to impress modern observers. Pottery was produced on a massive scale with standardized forms that were replicated across the entire civilization. The pottery wheels used by Indus Valley potters were highly advanced, allowing for the mass production of vessels with consistent quality. Decorative techniques included painting, incising and stamping, creating distinctive styles that help archaeologists identify Harappan cultural influence wherever it spread. Metallurgy was another area where the Indus Valley civilization excelled. Bronze working reached high levels of sophistication, with craftsmen producing tools, weapons and ornaments using advanced techniques including lost wax casting. Copper and bronze were used to create everything from simple fish hooks to elaborate figurines, including the famous dancing girl bronze statue from Mohenjo-daro, a masterpiece of ancient art that demonstrates both technical skill and artistic sensitivity. Gold and silver were also worked, though these precious metals seem to have been relatively rare and were used primarily for small ornamental objects like beads and bangles. The bead-making industry of the Indus Valley deserves special mention, as it produced some of the most sought-after trade goods of the ancient world. Carnelian beads from the Indus Valley have been found in royal tombs in Mesopotamia, testament to their value and the extent of Harappan trade networks. The production of these beads required exceptional skill and patience. Long carnelian beads were particularly prized, requiring careful drilling from both ends to create a straight hole through stones that could be several inches long. The techniques developed by Indus Valley craftsmen for working with hard stones like carnelian and agate wouldn't be surpassed until much later periods. The steatite seals of the Indus Valley civilization represent one of their most distinctive and enigmatic creations. Thousands of these seals have been discovered, typically square in shape and featuring exquisitely carved images of animals, mythological creatures, and occasional human figures, along with short inscriptions in the still undeciphered Indus script. The most common motif is the unicorn, though whether this represents an actual one-horned animal, a stylized representation of a bull shown in profile, or a mythological creature remains unclear. Other animals depicted include elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, and water buffalo, all rendered with remarkable naturalism and attention to detail. These seals were almost certainly used in economic transactions, probably pressed into clay to seal containers or to mark ownership. The fact that each seal appears to be unique suggests they may have identified individuals or families, perhaps functioning something like a signature or personal identification. The widespread distribution of these seals across the Indus Valley region and beyond indicates their importance in the economic system. Some seals have been found as far away as Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, carried there either by Harappan traders or as traded objects themselves. The mystery of the Indus script remains one of the most tantalizing puzzles in archaeology. Despite decades of effort by scholars around the world, the script remains undeciphered, keeping the thoughts and words of the Indus Valley people locked away from our understanding. The script appears on seals, pottery, and other objects, typically in short inscriptions of just a few symbols. Scholars have identified between 400 and 600 distinct symbols, suggesting the script was logosyllabic rather than alphabetic. The brevity of most inscriptions has made decipherment extremely difficult, as there simply isn't enough text to allow for the kind of statistical analysis that helped crack other ancient scripts. Various theories have been proposed about the language or languages the script might represent. Some scholars argue for a Dravidian language, pointing to the presence of Dravidian-speaking populations in South India and the existence of a Dravidian-speaking group, the Brahui, in modern Pakistan. Others suggest the language might have been an early form of Indo-European, perhaps related to Sanskrit. Still others propose that it might represent a language family that has since become extinct. Without a bilingual inscription like the Rosetta Stone that helped decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, or without longer texts that would allow for pattern analysis, the Indus script may remain a mystery indefinitely. The trade networks of the Indus Valley civilization stretched across vast distances, connecting South Asia with Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, and Mesopotamia. This wasn't casual or sporadic trade, but a well-organized system that involved specialized merchants, standardized weights and measures, and probably sophisticated credit and exchange mechanisms. The evidence for this trade comes from multiple sources: Harappan seals found in Mesopotamia, Mesopotamian texts that mention trade with a land called Meluha, which scholars identify with the Indus Valley, and the presence of non-local materials in Indus Valley sites. The maritime trade of the Indus Valley civilization was particularly impressive. Coastal sites like Dholavira and Sutka Gandor served as ports, while the recently discovered site of Dholavira's sophisticated water conservation system suggests these coastal communities were well adapted to their environment. A massive dockyard discovered at Lothal in Gujarat provides direct evidence of maritime activities. This structure, measuring approximately 214 meters long and 36 meters wide, was connected to the sea by a channel and could have accommodated fairly large vessels. The precision of its construction, with walls designed to withstand tidal pressures, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering. Ships from the Indus Valley sailed along the coasts of the Arabian Sea, reaching ports in the Persian Gulf and possibly beyond. These vessels would have carried the products of Harappan craftsmen: carnelian beads, shell bangles, ivory combs, cotton textiles, and perhaps spices and other perishable goods that haven't survived in the archaeological record. In return, they brought back silver from Afghanistan, lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, turquoise from Iran, and perhaps dates and other products from Mesopotamia. This trade would have required not just navigational skills but also knowledge of monsoon patterns, coastal geography, and the political and economic conditions in distant lands. Overland trade routes connected the Indus Valley with regions to the north and west. The presence of Harappan materials at sites in Afghanistan and Central Asia indicates trade connections with these regions, possibly including the early Silk Road routes that would later become so important. To the east, while evidence is less clear, there are indications of contact with the Gangetic Plain, and possibly regions even further east. The standardization of weights and measures across the Indus Valley civilization would have greatly facilitated this trade, allowing merchants from different regions to conduct business with confidence. The agricultural practices of the Indus Valley civilization were sophisticated and well adapted to local conditions. They practiced flood irrigation, taking advantage of the annual inundation of the Indus and its tributaries to water their fields. Evidence suggests they also constructed irrigation channels and possibly simple dams to control water flow. Crop rotation was probably practiced to maintain soil fertility, and the diversity of crops grown provided insurance against failure of any single crop. The large granaries found at several sites, particularly the massive structure at Harappa, indicate centralized storage of agricultural surpluses, though whether these were state-controlled or communally managed remains unclear. The diet of the Indus Valley people was varied and nutritious. Wheat and barley were the staple grains, ground into flour using grinding stones and probably baked into flatbreads similar to modern chapati or roti. Lentils and chickpeas provided protein, while sesame seeds were used for oil. Dates and melons were grown for fruit, and evidence suggests they may have cultivated grapes as well. Milk and milk products from cattle, water buffalo and goats supplemented the diet, as did meat from these animals and from wild game. Fish was important for coastal and riverine communities, and the presence of fish bones at inland sites suggests dried fish was traded over considerable distances. The clothing of the Indus Valley people, while rarely preserved directly, can be inferred from various sources. The cultivation of cotton and the discovery of spindle whorls and other textile working tools indicate a well-developed textile industry. Figurines and seals provide some indication of clothing styles, suggesting that men often wore a lower garment similar to a dhoti and sometimes an upper garment draped over one shoulder. Women's clothing appears to have included skirts and possibly upper garments, though many figurines show elaborate jewellery but minimal clothing, which might reflect either actual practice or artistic convention. The quality of Harappan textiles was apparently high enough that they were valued trade goods, with Mesopotamian texts possibly referring to clothing from Meluha. Personal adornment was clearly important in Indus Valley society. Jewellery has been found in abundance, ranging from simple terracotta bangles that would have been affordable to common people to elaborate necklaces of gold, silver, and semi-precious stones that indicate considerable wealth. Both men and women wore jewellery, including bangles, necklaces, earrings, and rings. The sophistication of jewellery-making techniques, including granulation and filigree work, demonstrates high levels of craftsmanship. Cosmetics were also used, with evidence for eye makeup similar to kohl and possibly other beauty products. The recreational activities of the Indus Valley people can be glimpsed through various archaeological finds. Toys have been discovered at many sites, including wheeled carts that are among the earliest wheeled toys known anywhere in the world. Whistles shaped like birds, spinning tops and marbles suggest children's games. Gaming boards for what appears to be an early form of chess or checkers have been found, indicating adult recreational activities. Dancing and music were almost certainly important, as suggested by the famous dancing girl figurine and the discovery of what may be drums and other musical instruments. The architectural achievements of the Indus Valley civilization extended beyond urban planning to include sophisticated engineering solutions. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, perhaps the most famous structure from this civilization, demonstrates remarkable technical skill. The pool, measuring approximately 12 meters by 7 meters and 2.4 meters deep, was made watertight through the use of carefully fitted bricks and a layer of bitumen. The surrounding structure included changing rooms, a well that supplied water, and an efficient drainage system. The precision of construction and attention to detail suggest this was a structure of great importance, probably used for ritual purification ceremonies. The so-called granaries at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro represent another architectural achievement, though their actual function remains debated. The structure at Harappa consists of a series of rectangular blocks arranged in 2 rows with a central passage. The careful construction, with foundations designed to protect against moisture and provisions for air circulation, suggests these were indeed storage facilities, though whether for grain or other goods remains uncertain. If they were granaries, their size indicates the ability to store substantial surpluses, which would have been crucial for supporting urban populations and surviving poor harvests. Defensive architecture appears to have been minimal in most Indus Valley cities, a striking contrast to contemporary civilizations. While the cities had walls, these seem to have been designed more for flood control and defining civic boundaries than for military defense. The absence of weapons in large quantities, the lack of artistic depictions of warfare, and the absence of destruction layers that would indicate violent conquest all suggest that the Indus Valley civilization was remarkably peaceful. This doesn't mean there was no conflict at all, but rather that warfare didn't play the central role it did in many other ancient societies. The water management systems of the Indus Valley civilization deserve special attention as they represent some of the most advanced hydraulic engineering of the ancient world. Beyond the famous drainage systems and wells, recent excavations have revealed sophisticated water conservation structures. A dolivera, a series of reservoirs and channels collected and stored rainwater, crucial in this relatively arid region. The precision with which these structures were built, with carefully calculated gradients and overflow channels, demonstrates deep understanding of hydraulic principles. Some scholars suggest that the Indus Valley civilization's expertise in water management may have influenced later Indian traditions of water conservation and irrigation. The question of how the Indus Valley civilization was governed remains one of the most debated topics among scholars. The absence of clear palaces, royal tombs, or monumental art depicting rulers has led to various theories. Some scholars propose that the civilization was governed by a priest-king class, pointing to the famous priest-king statue from Mohenjo-daro, though this identification is far from certain. Others suggest a form of oligarchy, with merchant guilds or clan leaders sharing power. Still others propose something approaching a republic or democracy, with decisions made collectively by assemblies of citizens. The standardization evident across the civilization, in brick sizes, weights and measures, and urban planning, certainly suggests some form of central authority, or at least widely accepted standards. However, this could have been achieved through various means, from imperial decree to voluntary adoption of best practices. The absence of obvious military infrastructure suggests that whatever form of government existed, it didn't rely primarily on force to maintain order. The possibility that the Indus Valley civilization developed a unique form of governance, different from the monarchies and city-states of their contemporaries, remains one of the most intriguing aspects of this ancient society. Religious and spiritual practices in the Indus Valley civilization appear to have been complex and varied, though our understanding is limited by the absence of deciphered texts. The material evidence suggests several important themes. Water clearly held religious significance, as indicated by the Great Bath and the numerous ritual bathing platforms found at various sites. This emphasis on ritual purity through bathing would later become a central feature of Hinduism, suggesting possible continuities between Harappan and later Indian religious traditions. Female figurines, often interpreted as goddess or fertility figures, are common finds at Indus Valley sites. These terracotta figurines with elaborate headdresses and jewellery might represent a mother goddess cult, though their exact significance remains debated. Male deities are less clearly represented, though the famous seal depicting a horned figure seated in what appears to be a yogic posture has been interpreted by some as a proto-Shiva, the later Hindu god associated with yoga and asceticism. If this interpretation is correct, it would represent one of the earliest depictions of yogic practice. Animal symbolism was clearly important in Indus Valley religion. The unicorn seals, despite their frequency, remain enigmatic. We don't know whether they represent a mythological creature, a stylized real animal, or have some other symbolic meaning. Bulls appear frequently and seem to have held special significance, possibly as symbols of strength and fertility. The reverence for certain trees, particularly the pipal tree which appears on several seals, suggests nature worship that would also continue in later Indian traditions. The treatment of the dead in the Indus Valley civilization was generally simple, contrasting sharply with the elaborate burial practices of Egypt or the royal tombs of Mesopotamia. Most burials were extended inhumations in simple pits, with the deceased placed on their back with their head generally pointing north. Grave goods were modest. typically including pottery vessels that may have contained food or drink for the afterlife, and personal ornaments like bangles or beads. The relative equality in burial practices, with no dramatically rich tombs, reinforces the impression of a relatively egalitarian society. Some variations in burial practices have been noted, possibly reflecting different communities or evolving traditions over time. At Kalibangan, for instance, symbolic burials have been found with grave goods but no human remains, possibly representing cenotaphs for people who died away from home. At some sites, fractional burials have been discovered where only part of the skeleton was interred, possibly after exposure of the body. These variations suggest diversity in religious beliefs and practices within the broader Harappan cultural tradition. The decline and eventual disappearance of the Indus Valley civilization around 1900 to 1300 BCE remains one of ancient history's great mysteries. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual process that played out over several centuries and probably had multiple causes. Various theories have been proposed, and the truth likely involves a combination of factors rather than a single catastrophic event. Climate change appears to have played a significant role. Evidence suggests that the monsoon patterns shifted around 2000 BCE, leading to decreased rainfall in the Indus Valley region. This would have had severe impacts on agriculture, particularly in areas dependent on rain-fed farming. The drying up of the Gagahakra River, which some scholars identify with the legendary Sarasvati River, would have been particularly devastating for the numerous settlements along its banks. Prolonged drought would have led to crop failures, economic disruption, and possibly social unrest. Tectonic activity may have contributed to the civilization's decline. The Indus Valley region is seismically active, and earthquakes could have damaged cities and irrigation systems. More significantly, tectonic uplift may have altered the course of rivers, disrupting the flood patterns that agriculture depended upon. At Mohenjo-daro, evidence suggests that the city suffered from repeated flooding in its later phases, possibly due to changes in river behavior caused by tectonic activity. The effort required to repeatedly rebuild after floods would have strained resources and morale. Environmental degradation caused by human activity probably played a role as well. Deforestation to provide timber for construction and fuel for kilns and hearths would have led to soil erosion and decreased rainfall. Overgrazing by livestock could have degraded pastures, while intensive agriculture might have led to soil exhaustion in some areas. The very success of the Indus Valley civilization in supporting large urban populations may have ultimately contributed to environmental problems that undermined its sustainability. The possibility of disease outbreaks shouldn't be overlooked. The concentration of people in urban centers, while enabling the achievements of civilization, also created ideal conditions for epidemic diseases. The sophisticated sanitation systems of Harappan cities would have provided some protection, but if these systems began to fail due to other stresses, disease could have become a serious problem. Some skeletal remains from the late period show signs of disease and malnutrition, suggesting health problems in the population. External pressures may have contributed to the decline, though the evidence for invasion or conquest is limited. The arrival of Indo-European-speaking peoples in the region, traditionally dated to around 1500 BCE but possibly earlier, may have disrupted existing social and economic systems. However, there's little evidence for widespread destruction or violence that would indicate military conquest. Instead, the interaction between the declining Harappan population and incoming groups was probably complex, involving both conflict and cooperation, trade and competition. The breakdown of long-distance trade networks would have had serious economic consequences. If political instability in Mesopotamia or Central Asia disrupted trade routes, or if environmental problems made certain routes impassable, the economic foundation of many Indus Valley cities would have been undermined. The standardized weights and measures that had facilitated trade became less uniform in the late period, suggesting a breakdown in central authority or agreed standards. Social and political factors probably played a role as well. If the Indus Valley civilization was indeed governed through some form of collective decision-making rather than autocratic rule, it may have been poorly equipped to respond to multiple simultaneous crises. The apparent absence of a warrior class or strong military tradition, while contributing to the civilization's peaceful character, may have left it vulnerable when conditions deteriorated. Internal conflicts over resources during times of scarcity could have weakened social cohesion. The process of decline wasn't uniform across the entire Indus Valley region. Some cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, show clear signs of decline, with later occupation levels showing poorer construction and the breakdown of civic amenities. Other sites were simply abandoned, their populations presumably migrating to areas with better conditions. In some regions, particularly Gujarat and the eastern Punjab, Harappan cultural traditions continued longer, though in transformed and localized forms. The migration of Indus Valley populations during the decline phase had profound consequences for the subsequent history of South Asia. Many scholars believe that Harappan populations moved eastward into the Gangetic Plain, southward into Gujarat and Maharashtra, and possibly northward into the Punjab and Kashmir. These migrations would have carried Harappan knowledge and traditions into new regions, influencing the development of later cultures. The sophisticated urban planning, craft techniques, and possibly religious concepts of the Indus Valley civilization didn't simply disappear, but were transformed and incorporated into new cultural contexts. The legacy of the Indus Valley civilization can be traced in many aspects of later South Asian culture. The emphasis on ritual purity and bathing that characterized Harappan religion appears to have influenced later Hindu practices. The yoga posture depicted on the Proto-Shiva seal, if correctly interpreted, represents an early form of a practice that would become central to Indian spiritual traditions. The standardized weights used by Harappan merchants continued to be used in some regions for centuries after the civilization's decline. Agricultural techniques, craft traditions, and possibly even elements of social organization developed by the Indus Valley civilization influenced subsequent cultures in the region. Archaeological work continues to reveal new aspects of the Indus Valley civilization. Recent excavations have uncovered previously unknown sites, pushing back the dates for the civilization's origins and extending its geographical range. New technologies, including satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and advanced dating techniques, are providing fresh insights into Harappan society. DNA analysis of skeletal remains is beginning to shed light on population movements and relationships. Each new discovery adds to our understanding while often raising new questions. The site of Rakhigarhi in Haryana, now recognized as possibly the largest Indus Valley city, has yielded important new information about Harappan culture. Excavations there have uncovered evidence of different occupational phases, craft production areas, and burial sites that are providing new data about Harappan society. The discovery of a couple buried together with rich grave goods has challenged assumptions about Harappan burial practices and social structure. DNA extracted from skeletal remains at Rakhigarhi has provided the first genetic data from the Indus Valley civilization, offering insights into population history. Dholavira, located on an island in the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, has emerged as one of the most important Indus Valley sites. Its sophisticated water conservation system, massive walls, and unique architectural features distinguish it from other Harappan cities. The discovery of a signboard with large Indus script characters at Dholavira represents one of the longest-known Indus inscriptions. The site's strategic location suggests it may have been an important centre for trade, particularly in the procurement and processing of raw materials like shell and semi-precious stones. The question of whether the Indus Valley civilization should be called a civilization at all has been debated by some scholars who prefer terms like Indus Valley tradition or Harappan culture. These debates reflect broader questions about how we define civilization and whether Western-derived categories appropriately describe non-Western societies. Whatever terminology we use, the achievements of the people who lived in the Indus Valley between 3300 and 1300 BCE clearly represent one of humanity's great early experiments in urban living, social organization, and technological innovation. The study of the Indus Valley civilization has implications beyond ancient history. As modern societies grapple with challenges of urbanization, environmental sustainability, and social equality, the Harappan experience offers both inspirations and warnings. Their successful management of water resources in a challenging environment provides lessons for modern water conservation. Their apparent ability to maintain social cohesion without obvious autocratic rule raises questions about alternative forms of governance. Their eventual decline in the face of environmental and possibly social challenges serves as a reminder of the fragility of even the most sophisticated societies. The role of women in Indus Valley society remains a subject of considerable interest and debate. The prevalence of female figurines, some clearly depicting goddesses or important female figures, suggest women held significant positions in religious and possibly social contexts. The dancing girl bronze statue, with its confident pose and minimal clothing, has been interpreted various ways, but certainly suggests that at least some women had the freedom to engage in public performance or ritual activities. The absence of clear evidence for the kind of patriarchal structures seen in many ancient societies has led some scholars to suggest that the Indus Valley civilization may have been more gender egalitarian than its contemporaries. Evidence from burials provides some clues about gender relations. Women were buried with jewellery and other grave goods, suggesting they had personal property and social status. Some female burials include tools and craft implements, indicating that women participated in various economic activities. The absence of dramatic differences between male and female burials suggests relatively equal treatment in death, which might reflect relatively equal treatment in life. However, without deciphered texts that might describe social norms and laws, our understanding of gender relations in the Indus Valley remains largely speculative, based on material evidence that can be interpreted in multiple ways. The education and transmission of knowledge in the Indus Valley civilization must have been sophisticated, given the standardization of crafts, weights, and measures across such a vast area. The consistency in brick sizes, the precision of bead-making techniques, and the uniformity of pottery styles all suggest systematic training of craftspeople. Whether this education took place through family apprenticeships, guild systems, or formal schools remains unknown. The existence of the Indus script implies literacy among at least some portion of the population, probably merchants, administrators, and craft specialists. The script's presence on everyday objects like pottery suggests literacy wasn't confined to a tiny elite, though how widespread it was remains unclear. The mathematical knowledge of the Indus Valley people is evident in their architectural achievements and standardized measurement systems. The precise right angles of their city planning, the accurate gradients of their drainage systems, and the consistency of their weights all demonstrate mathematical sophistication. They used a decimal system, as evidenced by their weights, which increase in ratios related to the number 10. Some scholars have suggested that the proportions used in Harappan architecture show knowledge of advanced mathematical concepts, though this remains debated. The cubical weights found at numerous sites follow a complex system that would have required mathematical understanding to use effectively in trade. The medical knowledge of the Indus Valley civilization can only be inferred from indirect evidence. The emphasis on cleanliness and sanitation suggests understanding of the relationship between hygiene and health. The sophisticated drainage systems and access to clean water would have reduced the incidence of waterborne diseases. Evidence of surgical tools has been found at some sites, and there are instances of healed bone fractures in skeletal remains, suggesting some form of medical treatment. The cultivation of plants that would later be used medicinally in Ayurvedic tradition might indicate early pharmaceutical knowledge, though direct evidence is lacking. The concept of time and calendar systems in the Indus Valley civilization remains poorly understood. Agricultural societies require knowledge of seasonal patterns, and the success of Harappan agriculture implies accurate observation of annual cycles. Some scholars have suggested that certain structures might have had astronomical alignments, though this remains controversial. The standardization across the civilization suggests coordinated timing for various activities, possibly including religious festivals or market days. Small objects that might be gaming pieces or counting tokens could have been used for calendar calculations, but without deciphered texts, their actual purpose remains unknown. The soundscape of an Indus Valley city would have been rich and varied. The workshops would have resonated with the sounds of craftsmanship, the rhythmic hammering of metal workers, the whir of pottery wheels, the grinding of grain in querns. The streets would have echoed with the calls of merchants, the lowing of cattle being driven to market, the creak of ox carts carrying goods. Religious ceremonies probably involved music, as suggested by the drums and whistles found at various sites. The splash of water from the numerous wells and bathing platforms would have been a constant background sound, a reminder of the civilization's emphasis on cleanliness and water management. The animals that shared the urban spaces of the Indus Valley cities were numerous and varied. Dogs, descendants of wolves domesticated thousands of years earlier, served as companions, guards, and possibly hunting aids. Cats, perhaps newly domesticated or semi-wild, would have helped control rodent populations in grain storage areas. Cattle and water buffalo were kept within the cities, providing milk and transportation. Chickens pecked in courtyards, providing eggs and meat. Monkeys might have been urban scavengers, as they are in many South Asian cities today. This close relationship between humans and animals is reflected in the art of the period, with numerous animal figurines and seals depicting creatures both domestic and wild. The childhood experience in the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been enriched by toys and games. Miniature carts, some with movable parts, suggest children played at the adult activities they observed. Small figurines of animals and humans might have been used in imaginative play or storytelling. Whistles and rattles provided musical entertainment. Marbles and tops required skill and provided competition. The presence of these toys at sites across the civilization suggests that childhood was recognized as a distinct phase of life, deserving of special objects and activities. The care taken in making these toys, some of which are quite elaborate, speaks to the affection adults had for children. The nightlife of Indus Valley cities would have been quite different from the daytime bustle. Without electric lighting, most activities would have ceased at sunset. Oil lamps, numerous examples of which have been found, would have provided limited illumination for evening activities. Some crafts, particularly those requiring fine detail work, would have been impossible after dark. Social gatherings might have taken place in courtyards under the stars. Religious ceremonies might have had nocturnal components, particularly those related to astronomical observations. The flat rooftops of houses might have served as sleeping areas during hot summer nights, as they do in many parts of South Asia today. The seasonal rhythms would have profoundly influenced life in the Indus Valley civilization. The monsoon season, bringing vital rain for agriculture, would have been eagerly anticipated and probably celebrated with religious ceremonies. The planting and harvest seasons would have required intensive labour, possibly drawing urban dwellers to help in the fields. The cooler winter months might have been the preferred time for long-distance trade journeys. The extreme heat of summer would have made the sophisticated water management systems and bathing facilities especially important. These seasonal patterns would have been reflected in diet, with fresh foods available at certain times and preserved foods important during others. The linguistic diversity of the Indus Valley civilization is another mystery. The vast geographical extent of the civilization and the presence of different pre-Harappan cultural traditions suggest that multiple languages might have been spoken. The Indus script might have been used to write different languages, as cuneiform was used for various languages in Mesopotamia. Trade contacts with other regions would have required at least some people to be multilingual. The eventual disappearance of the Indus script might be related to linguistic changes, possibly the adoption of new languages that were written in different scripts or not written at all. The question of cultural identity and ethnicity in the Indus Valley civilization is complex and controversial. Modern attempts to link the Harappans with particular ethnic or linguistic groups often reflect contemporary political concerns rather than ancient realities. The civilization clearly included diverse populations, as evidenced by variations in burial practices, pottery styles, and other cultural markers. Whether these differences represented ethnic distinctions, occupational specializations, or other social categories remains unclear. The remarkable cultural unity across the civilization, despite this diversity, suggests successful mechanisms for integration and cooperation. The spiritual and philosophical contributions of the Indus Valley civilization to later Indian thought remain a subject of speculation and debate. The apparent emphasis on ritual purity, the possible practice of yoga, the reverence for certain trees and animals, and the complex symbolism of the seals all suggest sophisticated religious and philosophical concepts. Some scholars see continuities between Harappan religion and later Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, though direct connections are difficult to prove. The absence of grand temples and the apparent focus on personal or household religious practice might have influenced the development of Indian spiritual traditions that emphasize individual practice alongside communal worship. The environmental ethics of the Indus Valley civilization, while impossible to fully reconstruct, seem to have included respect for water and possibly other natural resources. The careful management of water, the apparent absence of excessive monumental architecture that would have required massive resource extraction, and the sustainable urban planning all suggest an ethos of living within environmental limits. However, the eventual environmental problems that may have contributed to the civilization's decline remind us that even environmentally conscious societies can face sustainability challenges. The artistic legacy of the Indus Valley civilization continues to inspire modern artists and designers. The elegant simplicity of Harappan pottery, the naturalistic animal sculptures, the geometric patterns of the seals, and the graceful human figurines all demonstrate aesthetic sensibilities that resonate with contemporary tastes. Museums worldwide display Indus Valley artifacts as masterpieces of ancient art. Modern jewelry designers draw inspiration from Harappan beadwork. The dancing girl has become an icon, reproduced countless times and interpreted by numerous artists. The influence of Indus Valley urban planning can perhaps be seen in later South Asian cities, though direct connections are difficult to establish. The emphasis on drainage, the provision of public bathing facilities, the organization of craft quarters, and the integration of residential and commercial areas all became features of later Indian cities. Whether this represents continuity from Harappan times or independent development remains debated. What is clear is that the Indus Valley civilization demonstrated that sophisticated urban planning was possible in the Bronze Age, setting standards that many later cities would struggle to match. The economic innovations of the Indus Valley civilization had lasting impacts. The standardized weights and measures facilitated trade across vast distances and may have influenced later South Asian measurement systems. The production techniques for various crafts, from pottery to metallurgy, established traditions that continued for millennia. The cultivation of cotton and the production of cotton textiles began an industry that would eventually make India famous worldwide. The trade networks established by Harappan merchants may have laid the groundwork for later commercial routes. The social innovations of the Indus Valley civilization, particularly the apparent absence of extreme hierarchy and the emphasis on public amenities, offer alternative models for social organization. While we cannot fully understand their social system, the evidence suggests they achieved remarkable prosperity and cultural sophistication without the extreme inequality that characterized many ancient civilizations. This doesn't mean they achieved perfect equality, but rather that they may have found ways to limit inequality and maintain social cohesion that differed from their contemporaries. The technological achievements of the Indus Valley people in metallurgy deserve special recognition. They were among the earliest people to develop bronze on a large scale in South Asia, creating alloys with consistent properties. Their technique of lost wax casting used to create complex bronze figurines was highly sophisticated. They worked with copper, bronze, silver, gold, and lead, each requiring different techniques and knowledge. The tools they produced were effective and durable, enabling the various crafts and construction projects that characterized their civilization. Some of their techniques wouldn't be improved upon for centuries. The pottery traditions of the Indus Valley civilization achieved remarkable standardization, while still allowing for regional variations and artistic expression. The wheel-thrown pottery was typically well-fired and durable. Decorative techniques included painting, usually in black on a red background, incising and stamping. Common motifs included geometric patterns, plants, animals, and occasionally human figures. The pottery served both utilitarian and possibly ritual purposes. Large storage jars, cooking vessels, serving dishes, and drinking cups have all been found. Some vessels show evidence of specific uses, such as perforated vessels that may have been used for straining or steaming. The textile industry of the Indus Valley Civilization, while leaving few direct remains, was clearly sophisticated and important. The cultivation of cotton was a major agricultural innovation that would have worldwide impact. Spindle whorls found at every site indicate that thread production was a common household activity. The uniformity of spindle whorl weights suggests standardized thread production, possibly for trade. Impressions of textiles on other objects show that both plain and patterned weaves were produced. The quality of Harappan textiles was apparently high enough that they were valued in international trade, possibly reaching as far as Mesopotamia. The stoneworking traditions of the Indus Valley Civilization produced both utilitarian and decorative objects of high quality. The long carnelian beads that were a specialty of Harappan craftsmen required exceptional skill to produce. The drilling of these hard stones required specialized tools and techniques, possibly including diamond-tipped drills. The shaping and polishing of stones into beads, weights, and seals demonstrates mastery of different techniques for different materials. Steatite or soapstone was carved into seals and other objects, then sometimes glazed to create a hard surface. The sourcing of various stones from specific locations and their distribution across the civilization indicates organized procurement and trade systems. The shell-working industry was another important craft, particularly at coastal sites. Shells were cut, carved, and polished to create bangles, beads, and other ornamental objects. The techniques for cutting thick shell bangles from conch shells required specialized knowledge and tools. These shell products were traded far inland, with shell bangles found at sites throughout the Indus Valley region. The importance of shell ornaments may have had religious or social significance beyond their decorative value. Some scholars suggest that the wearing of shell bangles, which continues in South Asian cultures today, may have originated in Harappan times. The ivory and bone working of the Indus Valley Civilization produced both decorative and functional objects. Ivory, probably from elephants, was carved into combs, game pieces, and ornamental objects. Bone was used for tools such as needles and awls, as well as for decorative items. The quality of carving, particularly on ivory combs with their fine teeth and sometimes decorative backs, demonstrates considerable skill. The procurement of ivory would have required either hunting elephants or trade with regions where elephants were more common, indicating the value placed on this material. The woodworking of the Indus Valley Civilization has left little direct evidence due to preservation issues, but indirect evidence suggests it was well developed. The construction of boats for river and maritime trade would have required skilled carpentry. Buildings incorporated wooden elements, including doors, roof beams, and possibly furniture. The wheeled carts depicted in toys and terracotta models would have had wooden components. Tools for woodworking, including copper and bronze axes, saws, and chisels, have been found. The deforestation that may have contributed to the civilization's decline suggests extensive use of wood for construction and fuel. The leatherworking industry must have been significant given the large numbers of domesticated animals, but leather rarely survives in the archaeological record. However, the presence of bone awls and needles suggests leather was sewn into various products. Leather would have been used for containers, clothing, footwear, and possibly coverings for carts and boats. The tanning process, which requires specific knowledge and materials, must have been understood. Specialized areas for leather working may have existed in cities, possibly located downwind due to the unpleasant odors associated with tanning. The food processing industries of the Indus Valley Civilization were essential for feeding urban populations. Grain was ground into flour using grinding stones, a labor-intensive process that probably occupied much of many people's time. Oil was extracted from sesame seeds and possibly other plants. Fermentation was probably used to produce alcoholic beverages and possibly to preserve foods. Salt, essential for preservation and diet, was obtained from coastal areas and possibly inland salt deposits. The processing and preservation of fish and meat would have been important, particularly for trade and storage. These food processing activities would have employed many people and been essential for urban life. The transportation systems of the Indus Valley Civilization were crucial for maintaining connections across their vast territory. Ox carts were the primary means of land transport, as evidenced by numerous toy models and the ruts worn in ancient streets. These carts were sophisticated, with spoked wheels that reduced weight while maintaining strength. Boats of various sizes plied the rivers and coasts, from small craft for local transport to larger vessels capable of sea voyages. The domestication of donkeys provided another means of transport, particularly for areas where wheeled vehicles couldn't go. Human porters would also have been important, particularly for short-distance transport within cities. The communication systems of the Indus Valley civilization, beyond the still undeciphered script, remain largely mysterious. The standardization across the civilization suggests effective communication of standards and practices. Whether this was achieved through traveling officials, written documents, or other means remains unknown. The seals may have served as a form of identification or authorization, facilitating communication in trade and administration. Signal fires, drums, or other methods may have been used for rapid communication over distances. The movement of ideas, technologies, and styles across the civilization indicates effective, if not fully understood, communication networks. The diplomatic and international relations of the Indus Valley civilization can be inferred from trade contacts and the peaceful nature of the society. The presence of Harappan materials in Mesopotamia and Central Asia indicates sustained international contacts. The absence of fortifications and weapons suggests that diplomacy rather than military force was the preferred means of managing external relations. Treaties or agreements must have existed to facilitate trade, though without deciphered texts we cannot know their nature. The presence of foreign materials in Indus Valley sites suggests reciprocal relationships rather than one-way exploitation. The legal system of the Indus Valley civilization is entirely unknown to us, but the orderly nature of the cities and the standardization of weights and measures suggest some form of law and enforcement. Disputes over property, trade agreements, and personal conflicts must have required resolution mechanisms. The apparent absence of palaces and royal imagery suggests that justice may have been administered by councils or assemblies rather than autocratic rulers. The uniformity of urban planning might indicate building codes or zoning regulations. The peaceful nature of the society suggests either effective law enforcement or strong social norms that minimized conflict. The intellectual achievements of the Indus Valley civilization, while difficult to assess without texts, must have been considerable. The planning required for their cities, the engineering of their water systems, the standardization of their measurements, and the organization of their trade all required sophisticated thinking. They must have had systems for recording and transmitting information, even if we cannot read them. The consistency of their cultural practices across vast distances and long time periods suggest effective educational and cultural transmission systems. Their influence on later South Asian intellectual traditions, while difficult to trace precisely, was probably significant. The daily routine of an average person in the Indus Valley civilization would have varied depending on their occupation, location, and social status. A farmer would rise early to tend fields and animals, using tools and techniques that had been refined over generations. A craftsperson might spend the day in a workshop producing goods for local use or trade. A merchant might negotiate deals, check weights and measures, and arrange for transport of goods. A housewife might grind grain, prepare meals, tend children, and possibly engage in textile production. Children would play with toys, help with household tasks, and perhaps attend some form of education. Evenings might be spent in family gatherings, religious observances, or community activities. The markets of Indus Valley cities would have been vibrant centers of economic and social activity. Farmers brought produce from the surrounding countryside. Craftspeople displayed their wares. Merchants from distant lands offered exotic goods. The standardized weights and measures would have facilitated fair trade. The variety of goods available, from basic foodstuffs to luxury items like carnelian beads and ivory combs, indicates a complex economy with something for different economic levels. The location of possible market areas in excavated cities, often near gates or in central locations, suggests their importance in urban life. The festivals and celebrations of the Indus Valley civilization are unknown to us, but they almost certainly existed. Agricultural societies typically celebrate planting and harvest times. Religious observances would have marked important calendar dates or mythological events. Life cycle events, births, coming-of-age ceremonies, marriages, deaths, would have been marked by rituals and gatherings. The presence of musical instruments and the dancing girl figurine suggest performance was part of celebrations. The gathering spaces in cities, such as the areas around the Great Bath, may have hosted communal celebrations. The migration and settlement patterns within the Indus Valley civilization show a dynamic society. New settlements were established as population grew and trade routes developed. Some sites show evidence of planning from their foundation, while others grew organically. The movement of people between rural and urban areas would have been common, with seasonal agricultural labour perhaps drawing city dwellers to the countryside. The eventual abandonment of cities during the decline phase represents massive population movements that reshaped the demographic landscape of South Asia. The environmental knowledge of the Indus Valley people was considerable, as evidenced by their successful adaptation to diverse ecosystems. They understood the behaviour of rivers and designed their cities to cope with flooding. They knew which crops grew best in different soils and climates. They identified sources of various raw materials and developed techniques for extracting and processing them. Their knowledge of animal behaviour enabled successful domestication and husbandry. This practical environmental knowledge, accumulated over generations, was crucial for the civilization's success. The astronomical knowledge of the Indus Valley civilization remains largely speculative. Like all agricultural societies, they must have observed celestial cycles to determine seasons. Some scholars have suggested that certain structures or city layouts have astronomical alignments, though this remains controversial. Small objects that might be calendrical devices have been found, but their interpretation is uncertain. The importance of astronomy in later Indian traditions suggests possible Harappan roots, but direct connections cannot be proven. What is clear is that they had sufficient understanding of seasonal cycles to successfully practice agriculture across diverse climate zones. The military capabilities of the Indus Valley civilization appear to have been limited, which makes their long-term success and expansion even more remarkable. Weapons are relatively rare in excavations, and those found, spearheads, arrowheads, axes, could have been used for hunting as much as warfare. The absence of swords and specialized military equipment suggests warfare was not a primary concern. No clear evidence of standing armies, warrior classes, or military infrastructure has been found. This peaceful character may have been a strength during stable times, but possibly a vulnerability when conditions change during the decline phase. The demographic structure of the Indus Valley civilization can only be partially reconstructed from skeletal remains and settlement patterns. Life expectancy was probably similar to other Bronze Age societies, with high infant mortality and few people living beyond 50 years. The population was young, with children and young adults comprising the majority. Gender ratios appear relatively balanced in burial populations. The presence of various pathologies in skeletal remains indicates that disease and injury were common, though many individuals survived these challenges. The large urban populations required constant immigration from rural areas to maintain their numbers, given the higher mortality rates typical of ancient cities. The psychological and emotional lives of the Indus Valley people are largely inaccessible to us, but we can make some inferences. The care taken in making toys suggests parental affection for children. The burial of individuals with personal ornaments indicates beliefs about identity persisting after death. The creation of art objects beyond purely functional needs points to aesthetic sensibilities and emotional expression. The apparent absence of monuments to individual rulers might indicate different concepts of pride and accomplishment than those in more hierarchical societies. The emphasis on cleanliness and order might reflect psychological preferences that became embedded in cultural norms. The influence of the Indus Valley civilization on later South Asian cultures was profound, even if the connections are not always clear. Many elements that became characteristic of South Asian civilization, the emphasis on ritual purity, the importance of trade and craftsmanship, certain architectural principles, possibly yoga and other spiritual practices, may have Harappan origins. The movement of Indus Valley populations during the decline phase would have carried their knowledge and traditions into new regions. The integration of Harappan and Indo-European traditions probably shaped the development of classical Indian civilization. As we near the end of our exploration of the Indus Valley civilization, it is worth reflecting on what this remarkable society achieved and what lessons it might offer for our own time. Here was a civilization that created some of the world's first planned cities, with amenities that wouldn't be matched in many places for thousands of years. They developed technologies and crafts that set standards for quality and sophistication. They maintained peaceful relations across a vast territory for nearly 2,000 years. They created a sustainable urban culture that supported millions of people while maintaining apparent social cohesion and relative equality. Yet the Indus Valley civilization also reminds us of the fragility of even the most successful societies. Environmental changes, whether natural or human-caused, can undermine the foundations of civilization. The breakdown of trade networks can have cascading economic effects. The inability to adapt to changing conditions can lead to decline and collapse. The loss of knowledge and skills when a civilization fails represents a tragedy for all humanity. The undeciphered Indus script stands as a poignant reminder of how much can be lost when civilizations disappear. The ongoing study of the Indus Valley civilization continues to yield new insights and raise new questions. Each excavation season brings new discoveries. Advances in technology provide new tools for analysis. Interdisciplinary approaches combining archaeology, genetics, climatology, and other fields are providing more comprehensive understanding. The decipherment of the Indus script, if it ever occurs, would revolutionize our understanding of this civilization. Even without such a breakthrough, patient archaeological work continues to reveal the complexity and sophistication of Harappan society. The relevance of the Indus Valley civilization extends beyond academic interest. As modern societies grapple with challenges of urbanization, environmental sustainability, and social inequality, the Harappan experience offers both positive examples and cautionary tales. Their successful water management in a challenging environment provides lessons for regions facing water scarcity. Their apparent ability to maintain social cohesion without extreme hierarchy offers alternative models for social organization. Their eventual decline reminds us of the need for adaptability and resilience in the face of change. The cultural heritage of the Indus Valley civilization belongs not just to the modern nations that occupy its former territory, but to all humanity. The sites and artifacts of this civilization are treasures that deserve protection and study. The knowledge gained from studying the Indus Valley civilization enriches our understanding of human history and cultural development. The questions it raises about alternative paths of social development challenge our assumptions about progress and civilization. Looking forward, the study of the Indus Valley civilization will undoubtedly continue to evolve. New sites remain to be discovered and excavated. Known sites have been only partially excavated, with much still to be revealed. Advances in technology will provide new tools for analysis and interpretation. Collaboration between international teams of scholars will bring diverse perspectives to bear on old questions. The integration of Indus Valley studies with broader research on Bronze Age societies will provide comparative insights. The mystery of the Indus script remains one of the great challenges in archaeology. Whether it will ever be deciphered remains uncertain. The brevity of most inscriptions, the absence of bilingual texts, and the uncertainty about the underlying language all pose significant obstacles. Yet scholars continue to work on the problem, using computer analysis, comparative linguistics, and other approaches. Even if the script remains undeciphered, the study of its symbols and patterns provides insights into Harappan communication and possibly their conceptual world. The preservation of Indus Valley sites faces numerous challenges. Urban development, agricultural expansion, and industrial projects threaten many sites. Climate change poses risks through increased flooding or drought. Looting and illegal excavation destroy archaeological contexts. Tourism, while providing economic benefits and raising awareness, can also damage fragile remains. Balancing preservation with development needs requires careful planning and international cooperation. The public understanding and appreciation of the Indus Valley civilization has grown considerably in recent decades. Museums worldwide feature Harappan artifacts. Documentary films and popular books have brought this ancient civilization to broader audiences. Educational curricula increasingly include the Indus Valley civilization alongside other ancient civilizations. This growing awareness is important not just for historical knowledge, but for understanding the diversity of human cultural achievements. The Indus Valley civilization stands as testament to human ingenuity, creativity, and adaptability. From humble beginnings as farming villages along river valleys, the Harappan people created one of the ancient world's most impressive civilizations. They built cities that were marvels of planning and engineering. They developed crafts and technologies that set new standards for quality. They created trade networks that connected diverse regions and cultures. They maintained their cultural identity across vast distances and long time periods. And when conditions changed, their population adapted, migrated, and contributed to the formation of new cultural traditions. In conclusion, the Indus Valley civilization represents one of humanity's great early experiments in urban living and complex society. Its achievements in urban planning, craft production, trade organization, and social cohesion were remarkable for their time and remain impressive today. The mysteries that still surround this civilization, the undeciphered script, the nature of their governance, the causes of their decline, continue to intrigue scholars and the public alike. As we face our own challenges of creating sustainable, equitable, and prosperous societies, the example of the Indus Valley civilization offers both inspiration and warnings. Their success in creating a peaceful, prosperous civilization that lasted for nearly 2 millennia demonstrates what human societies can achieve. Their eventual decline reminds us that even the most successful civilizations must adapt to changing conditions or risk collapse. The story of the Indus Valley civilization is far from complete. New discoveries continue to add chapters to this ancient narrative. Each artifact recovered, each site excavated, each analysis completed adds to our understanding of these remarkable people. The farmers who first settled along the Indus River over 5,000 years ago could never have imagined that their descendants would create one of the ancient world's great civilizations, or that thousands of years later people around the world would study their achievements and ponder their mysteries. Yet that is exactly what happened, and the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization continues to unfold, offering insights into our past and perhaps guidance for our future. The Indus Valley civilization reminds us that human history is not a simple story of linear progress, but a complex narrative of diverse experiments in living. Different societies have found different solutions to the challenges of human existence. The Harappan way, with its emphasis on urban planning, social coordination, craft excellence, and peaceful trade, represents one such solution, remarkably successful in its time and place. Understanding and appreciating this diversity of human experience enriches our own perspective and perhaps helps us imagine new possibilities for organizing our own societies. As we conclude this extensive exploration of the Indus Valley civilization, we're left with a sense of both knowledge gained and mysteries remaining. We know so much more about this civilization than we did a century ago when the first excavations began, yet fundamental questions remain unanswered. This combination of knowledge and mystery, of understanding and wonder, is perhaps fitting for a civilization that achieved so much yet left so many secrets buried in the earth. The Indus Valley civilization continues to captivate us not just because of what we know about it, but also because of what we don't know, the tantalizing gaps in our understanding that invite continued investigation and speculation. If you found this journey through the history of the Indus Valley civilization enlightening and engaging, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel for more in-depth explorations of history's most fascinating civilizations and cultures. Your support helps us continue to bring these detailed historical narratives to life, uncovering the stories of our shared human past and the remarkable societies that have shaped our world. Thank you for joining us on this extensive exploration of one of humanity's most enigmatic and accomplished ancient civilizations.